What's up, everybody? This is your Uncle Bernie, man. I ain't dead yet. When I'm not dead, I'm listening to the artivist. We all be news and radio. I ain't scared of y'all. Kick it.
And that was the legendary high priestess of soul, Nina Simone, with that classic Mississippi Goddamn. And this is your host for the empowerment segment, R2C2H2, the artivist. And welcome once again, boys and girls, ladies and gents, scholars and laymen, to another wonderful edition of We All Be Radio. We all know this is a very interesting time that we're living in. And tonight we got a very exciting and controversial topic. It's Let's Talk, the Curtis Flowers trial, 6 verdict, and fallout. As you all are aware, who've been listening, who've been paying attention on the internet and all that good stuff, that Curtis Flowers became last month the first person to be tried 6 times on the same evidence in a capital trial in American judicial history. Now, we want to have some people on the phone that are very close to the man as well as to the case. And if you'd like to participate in this very important conversation, please feel free to call us at area code 646-652-4593. Once again, that's area code 646-652-4593. If you're scared to get on the air, our email is available at r2c2h2@gmail.com. Once again, that's alphabet R, numeric 2, alphabet C, numeric 2, alphabet H, numeric 2@gmail.com. And also we got the chat rooms open for your pleasure, so don't be surprised if you have your comments or questions read on the air. So without further ado, let's get down to the main business. On the phone with me right now, I got a beautiful, strong, courageous sister, a mother, if you will, the mother of Curtis Flowers, and Sister Lola Flowers. Are you there, ma'am?
Yes, I am.
Well, it was an honor to have you on. You got such a soft, polite voice, but you're such a strong person, and it's an honor to have you on tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also, we got on the air. There's another wonderful, beautiful sister who get her on. We got a heavy sister, Michelle Milner. Are you there?
I am.
It's an honor to have you on. I read the beautiful words of encouragement you read about Curtis Flowers, his character and his integrity. And you're a childhood friend of Curtis, correct?
That's right. We met when I was a teenager.
All right, it's an honor to have you on. And also, I think we got another distinguished person. It's like a fan club for Curtis Flowers, it seems like. But it's very important that people know about the man as well as about the trials and the tribulations going on right now. We got a couple of callers on. It's Brother A.L.L, Reverend A.L.L, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, Reverend Mean, he's a founder of Friends of Justice, one of Curtis Flowers' biggest supporters, kept a beautiful blog talking about the 6th trial. He actually witnessed what was going on, the judicial circus, the legal lynching of Curtis Flowers in the Winona courthouse this past June. He's an advocate for justice, a true pioneer. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well tonight. How are you, Ron?
Oh, fine. I can't complain. Got another caller. Interesting. I think I know who it is.
Oh, it's a
Yeah, area code 617, you on the air?
Oh, yeah, that's me. This is Lydia Bean.
Dr. Lydia Bean, out of Baylor University. It's an honor to have you on, the daughter of Reverend A.L.L Bean. Good people come from good stock. How y'all doing?
Good. How are you?
Well, it's an honor to have you on. So let's get down to the business then. We're here to talk about the last trial, the 6th trial of Curtis Flowers. Didn't have a positive outcome for Mr. Flowers, who's been in jail for about 13 years, really 13 years. The state sentenced him to lethal injection. Only took him 27 minutes to find him guilty this last trial. So, anybody want Sister Lola Flowers, let's get your perspective. How does it feel to go through all these trials? Because you actually went to every single trial. This is your son whose life is on the line.
It's hard to tell you how I feel. I mean, you have to go through this to know. I don't know. To sit there and go through this year after year, it's hurting. Sometimes you feel like you can't make it any longer, but thank God for prayer and His support. God just giving me the strength to keep on going. And with my supporters, Dr. A.L.L Bean, his daughter Lydia, and them, they have really been a support to us. I have really, I don't know, we wouldn't have made it without them, I don't think.
But this trial, I mean, this case, your son's case taking out basically all over the state of Mississippi, right?
Right.
A couple of changing venues. You think you can get a fair trial anywhere in Mississippi? Is it possible to get a fair trial for your son anywhere?
I don't know. We done been so many places and everybody know and hearing the same things over and over again. It's just hard to say. Just scared to say because the places they carried us to Tupelo, we had all the white jurors and just one black, and they carried us all the way to the coast and all white jurors and one black. So, I believe if we could get a jury that had black and white on there, he would stand a chance, But when we get the white jury, they've already made up their mind. He's convicted before they ever have the trial. That's just how I feel about it.
So what do you feel about this last trial which took place in your hometown of Winona? I mean, how do you feel? You thought it was a trial, man. What do you feel about it? I mean, the people, some of those people are on the jury, correct?
Not really,
But it's like in your town, so how does it feel like the fact that he was found guilty in his hometown? And what was the issue with black jurors? Because I know there was only one black juror in the jury.
They were saying the black jurors didn't qualify and all, and then when they would get up and ask about the death penalty, some of them said that they couldn't vote for the death penalty. Well, they could have at least considered it, That's what's wrong with the black folks now. They need to understand that they didn't ask them to vote right then. They could have said at least they would consider, so they could have been on the jury. That's how I feel about it.
Okay, I'm bringing some observers of the sixth trial, Reverend A.L.L and Dr. Lydia Bean. I mean, what was y'all, Dr. Bean, Reverend Bean, you kept a great blog on what's going down day by day, which I thought was really truly a godsend because it gave you a lot of insight. It's like a lot of tension in the town between the races, correct?
Hello?
Yeah, Reverend Bean, you hear me?
Yeah, my phone just dropped the call, so Lydia gave me hers.
Oh, okay.
We're in Tulia, Texas right now, so.
I was saying that you kept wonderful, very insightful day-by-day blogging of what's going down in the courts while you was there for the 2 weeks of the trial. Yeah. And what I get from your readings and your writings, is that it was a lot of tension between the races. It was very polarized. Yeah. And can you tell us, some insight how that was for you to experience?
Well, you have to really be in the room to feel it, but I think there's a general sense in the black community that Curtis isn't getting a fair trial. I think most people think that the Curtis they know would not be capable of committing a crime of that nature. It just doesn't jive with what they know about Curtis and what they know about the heinous nature of the crime. In the white community where people don't know Curtis personally, there's a very strong identification with the victims. Two of them were white and one of them was black, and two of the older white women, middle-aged women, Carmen Rigby and Bertha Tardy, were very prominent members of the white community, well-known, well-connected. And so I think there's a tendency in the white community to identify very strongly with the families, and so the families of the victims. And so they tend to see Curtis as the only possible suspect, and so they want to believe that he's guilty. And so you just get that natural divide in the courtroom. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Bean, what was your feelings, Lydia? What was your feelings on some of the proceedings? Because you were there as well.
Yeah. Well, I would say the jury selection, just getting to the earlier thing, was hard to watch. I mean, there was just this little spirit of intimidation in the courtroom. I mean, it wasn't just, black jurors were being eliminated because, part of it was the death penalty issue, but part of it was black jurors were doing everything they could to get off the jury pool. They were just afraid to serve. After what happened to James Bibbs, you could feel them basically any excuse to put their hand up and say, I couldn't be fair and impartial, a couple of people just said, I just don't want to do it, I don't want to serve it. I couldn't do it. And one woman even said, because I get up there and I disagree with them. She basically, saw herself in the jury room with a bunch of white jurors who had already made up their minds, and she didn't want to have to stand up against that. And so it was hard to, if you saw the transcript, I don't know if it would come through, but if you're there in the room, you could see people's faces and how scared they were to serve. I mean, it was brutal.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Also, I know Reverend Bean mentioned that Carmen Rigby and Bertha Tardy, two of the victims, were and affluent members of the white community. I also like to talk to Sister Michelle Milner, because I saw on a Friend of Justice website the beautiful article that she wrote in defense of Curtis Flowers' character. I just thought that was very fascinating. It was very passionate, and I love how she concluded it when she talked about James Baldwin coming to the aid of Angela Davis in her time of need. But Sister Michelle, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
I want to give the listeners an insight of the man known as Curtis Flowers, and I'll go back to his mom as well after this. The insight of who is Curtis Flowers, in your opinion.
I think what you said before about people knowing his character, like Curtis was never a person who had a violent temperament. He's always been easygoing. He's always been, laid back. He has always been approachable. I've never seen him moody. I've never seen him have a violent temper tantrum. That's just not something that would at all be in his character. That's just not the kind of person that he was. Now, I put it in my letter that I don't remember when we met, because when you meet him and you talk to him, he's so open. It's like you've always known him. So I never remember like an awkwardness whenever we met. And I felt like I needed to say something because I didn't hear a lot of people saying outwardly out of the black community that we are supporting him. We believe that he's innocent. And I felt like, what I wrote in my letter, I felt like a co-conspirator, because if I feel like he didn't do this, there's no reason for me to be silent. I have a First Amendment right, and I should feel free to exercise it.
I'm glad you did that, because it was a very wonderful letter that you wrote in defense of your friend Curtis Flowers and also Sister Lola Flowers. Can you tell us a little bit about your son yourself? I mean, you brought him into this world, you raised him. It's like to be a very exceptional person from other people's accounts as well.
Yes, Curtis, I never had a problem with Curtis fighting and doing things like that. I have another son that's older than Curtis. They would just joke around, play, laugh. I never had a problem. They never had a fight between the two of them. And he had two other cousins. They all play together. It's just a loving family. Curtis, not the type to cause any trouble or anything like that. He liked to fish. He liked to sing gospel songs. And that's basically Curtis, playing with his nieces and nephews and singing and fishing. It's no way Curtis could have killed old people.
Let me ask you this, because I know, the people were killed by gunshot wounds to the head. Did Curtis have a working knowledge of how to use guns?
No, Curtis didn't even hunt.
So he didn't use guns at all?
No, he didn't.
So wow, that's amazing. So I know Reverend Bean, you have a theory about what happened, what really happened. We all feel on this phone that or this conversation that Curtis did not do it, and the way things look. Tell us, Reverend Bean, what you think about the whole thing.
Well, when you tell people that 4 people were killed execution style, the first thing that comes to mind is that you're either dealing with an organized hit, in other words, a paid hit. Somebody wanted one of those people eliminated, or you're dealing with a random crime where people on a crime spree just happen to show up in town, and I think those are the only 2 scenarios that make any sense. Whoever did the crime was not interested primarily in money, and whoever did the crime, this was not their first rodeo. I mean, they had done violent acts before, and probably were in a process of sort of a steady upward escalation in the nature of the violence. And so when you try to imagine a single person who is not experienced with a handgun coming into a building as large as a furniture store and controlling 4 people and getting them to willingly allow him to shoot them in the back of the head one after another, it's almost impossible to imagine a guy like Curtis Flowers doing that. In fact, I can't imagine anybody doing it. I can imagine somebody killing 4 people But, you know, it would have been, some of them would have been running, they would have been shot in the arm, they would have been shot in the leg, there would have been signs of flight, there would have been signs of struggle. And in the store, there was nothing of that nature at all. And so I think the most likely scenario would be that there were at least two shooters involved, one person holding his gun on the other victims while the partner did the dirty work. Now, I can't prove that happened, but I think that's the most realistic scenario. And it is interesting that at the very time that the Tardy murders were taking place, a crime spree was going on just 200 miles to the east in Birmingham. And Winona and Birmingham are connected by Highway 82, U.S. Highway 82. And the interesting thing about that was it was two young kids. One was 16, I suspect a full-blown psychopath. The other was 19, somewhat mentally retarded. And they hit, I think, about 8 different properties. At first they were just doing, you know, petty robbery. And then the last 2 hits that they did, one just before the Tardy murders and one after, were both multiple shootings. They killed 2 people in one place and shot 2 people, one of whom died, one of whom survived in another location. Now, I'm not saying those people were responsible for the Tardy stores, but the similarity between the crimes is very striking. The same kind of weapon, a .380 automatic, was used, and both of those murders were captured on surveillance cameras. And it shows exactly that scenario that I have been thinking about, with one person holding the gun on the other victims while the second person did the shooting. And so I think that probably to most forensic experts would strike them as being much more likely than one single guy wandering in and doing these killings.
Yeah, my thing, I'm just puzzled about the fact that how could they connect Curtis to this, because, like, the mom and sister, he don't know how to use a gun, and there was no fingerprints. I mean, it was a shoe print, what I get from the reading, a shoe print from a Feli Grant Hill shoe that was left at the scene, but there was no fingerprints. Whatnot. I mean, do you, what happened to the young man? I know they're still in jail. Have they been, I mean, they been sentenced to death, or you don't know anything about the case?
The case in Alabama, they were both young men were sentenced to death, because one of them was a juvenile at the time. His sentence was commuted to life, and then the district attorney, when that happened, said, well, since since the 16-year-old was the killer, we should commute the other guy's sentence as well, because he actually didn't pull the trigger. And that created a bit of a controversy in Alabama. The Attorney General of Alabama thought that the DA was being soft on crime and politicized the issue, got it into the newspapers, and that's the only reason that I happen to know about that, because it was a prominent case that became prominent not so much at the time of the murders themselves, which was in 1996, but became prominent subsequent to that. And so the question is, what was happening elsewhere? What was happening in Arkansas? What was happening elsewhere in Mississippi? There isn't any indication that the people who were investigating the Curtis Flowers killing made any attempt to find out if there were any parallel crimes within, a reasonable vicinity. And so that's another issue, that the investigation bears all the earmarks of tunnel vision. And by tunnel vision, I mean that you latch on to the first suspect that comes to your attention, and then without trying to look at alternatives, you just decide that this is the guy, and you build all the evidence around that person. And that is precisely what has happened in this case. It became clear from listening to the testimony in the trial in Winona in June that Curtis had become the prime suspect, in fact, the only suspect, by lunchtime. That murders probably took place between 9:30 and 9:45, somewhere in that range in the morning. And by 11 or 12, all other suspects had been eliminated, and Curtis was the only person they were looking at. And the reason for that appears to be that a check in Curtis's name for $82 and some cents was found on the desk of Bertha Tardy. Her daughter, Roxanne Ballard, who was, of course, extremely distraught and in deep grief and shock drove down from Grenada, rushed into the building, looked through her mother's stuff. She found this check, and something clicked in her mind, and she became convinced that Curtis was the killer. She told the investigators that he was a dangerous person. They didn't ask her why she felt he was a dangerous person. She didn't have any personal experience with Curtis. She didn't know Curtis. The reason she thought he was dangerous was because she was convinced that he had just killed her mother and 3 other people. So there was a completely circular argument. She was not thinking clearly. You would not expect her to be thinking clearly, and certainly we aren't going to be critical of her for jumping to conclusions. That's a very natural human reaction. But the police officers got caught up in that emotion, and they were not thinking for themselves. And I think it was clear to me that a civilian, one of the daughters of one of the victims, took control of that investigation and really charted the course of the whole affair. And then subsequent to that, they started going door to door, talking to people along the route that they felt that Curtis had to walk, to first steal the murder weapon out of the parking lot of a factory, then walk home, then walk to Tardy Furniture, do the killing, and then run home. And so they went along those various routes with a picture of Curtis, making it very clear that there was a $30,000 reward for anybody who could provide any information. And it was very clear, they'd say, did you see Curtis at such a time? And the message is, if you say no, there ain't no dough. If you say yes, the Lord may bless, and if you change your mind, then there's going to be a perjury charge. And so those folks who decided to go for the money, or who talked themselves into believing they really had seen Curtis, came forward, and it took them 9 months, but they were able to line up 9 of these people. None of them are credible. When you look at them as individuals, they're all a little bit ridiculous, and there are big holes in all of their arguments. But taken cumulatively, one witness after another, it has a very powerful effect on a jury. There is nothing. The only thing more impressive to a jury than an eyewitness testimony is the confession. And we don't have a confession in this case, but we have a lot of eyewitness testimony. And so the question is, how did the investigators go about obtaining that testimony? That's what I want to know. And I don't think anybody has ever really investigated this case thoroughly. Certainly the state didn't do a very good job of investigating it, and no one has been able to retrace their steps and reinvestigate the case from a defense perspective, and that's what needs to happen now.
Yeah, I think you said about them 2 teenagers. My mind keep on going back to that, because I keep on thinking about the D.C. sniper case, where they were not only able to trace victims that John Muhammad and his accomplice allegedly killed in the D.C., Maryland area, but also they said, it was a crime spree because they connected them to cases in Alabama and whatnot. And to me, right, people will say, well, that's like, man, it's kind of like, it's reaching, but it's not really reaching if you got the means and whatever the motive is. Because you come from Louisiana, you got to go through these places. And I'm thinking, why haven't nobody, it's like it's a bunch of Barney Fife and Keystone cops down there. Why haven't anybody go to Alabama young guys? What's wrong with it? They could go down Highway 82, to get to Alabama to talk to these young guys who got nothing to lose.
I don't think they even found out these guys existed. I don't think they ever made any inquiries. And that kind of information, even in 1996, was available. There are state and federal sources of information that make that kind of information available to law enforcement if they are looking for it. But they weren't looking for it. They knew who the killer was. And I think the desire in the town was to move towards closure as quickly as possible. And there's also a tendency, I think, in law enforcement and also the DA's office, and in this case, pretty much the investigation was handled out of the DA's office. But there's a tendency for people to talk to each other and to gradually talk each other into a certain scenario. And that sort of takes on an orthodoxy, so that nobody wants to challenge the accepted truth. And so then it becomes an established fact that Curtis Flowers is indeed guilty, when really the evidence against him when you look at it piece by piece, is exceptionally weak, and it's all it doesn't really add up to anything. It just crumbles to dust in your hand when you look at it. But there's so much of it, and they work so hard to just sort of pile up all of these impression, physical evidence, and eyewitness testimony that the cumulative effect, as I said earlier, is quite powerful with juries. And I think part of the problem here also is the human memory. People don't realize how fickle the memory is and how easy it is to manufacture false recollections. And so that's part of the work that's cut out for us as well. But I'm convinced that unless we can find some new information, unless we can dig up some really startling new facts, that this case is going to be pretty much resolved the way it always has been. I mean, Curtis was convicted. He's been convicted 3 times before. This is the 4th conviction, the 4th death sentence. And so the question now is whether that will be reversed and it will be remanded back for trial again. And if it is, and if it goes to trial again, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't end in either a jury or another conviction. And somehow we've got to break that cycle for the sake of Lola Flowers, for the sake of Curtis Flowers, for the sake of the family members of the victims, for the sake of Winona, for the sake of Montgomery County. We've got to bring closure to this case in a way that everybody would be able to look at it and say, yes, that is a just resolution, and we're not anywhere near that now.
Yeah, I had reached out to some of the lawyers from the Capital Defense Counsel to participate in this dialogue tonight. They weren't able to, but Ray Carter, one of the lawyers from Curtis Flowers, sent me an email. I just want to read some of the stuff he said in the email. I thought it was very interesting. He agreed that Curtis Flowers did not get a fair trial. He believes, like in Flowers 6, that the jury failed to deliberate because their minds were made up before the trial. And they basically went back in the deliberation room and complied with the prosecution's closing argument command of capriciously filling out the verdict form to declare Mr. Flowers guilty. He said that we lost the case in the jury selection process due to the prosecutors and judges' obsession with precluding and or preventing the defense from getting a diverse jury. Yes, I know we had one black person on the jury who the 11 whites treated like a king for the duration of the trial. He said, his observation was, I watched them as they waited or stepped aside to let him go first as they entered and exited the jury box, smiled at him, patted him on the back. For a short period of time, he likely saw a Mississippi he never witnessed before. And he was talking about the issue with the blacks in terms of jury selection. In trial 6 was the fear of many blacks of getting in trouble or losing their jobs if they served as jurors at the trial. But his thing was he was so frustrated with the process that he didn't want to say the wrong thing on the air. So, well, I mean, I'm just being nice about it. But I just think that's interesting, just getting y'all responses. And also, Sister Lola Flowers, I'd like to ask you, do all the victim families feel that Curtis really did this? They feel like he's the one that actually did these horrible crimes?
I don't think so, because when we was down at Gulfport at the trial, Bertha Tyler's daughter, Roxanne Ballard, asked me, because she talked to me. I said, yeah. She told me she says, oh, we got some extra food if you all need some. I said, no, we have some food. She said, I just want to tell you, we don't think Curtis killed him, but we believe he know who did. And if they don't think he did, why are they trying to kill him, you know?
But she the one got him in trouble, then. I mean, this is they say that he did it, never met Curtis.
Right.
Before they saw his name on a paycheck. Mm-hmm. And she the one that got him out of this world of trouble.
Yeah.
This is Roxanne Ballard. She don't feel like he did it. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
One of the strangest things about this case is that on our blog, several people from Winona have been commenting on every post that I've been doing, and calling me crazy and calling me full of crap and using all kinds of pejorative language. But they've been reading all my stuff. They've been reading everything I've written about Curtis Flowers, and although they have been berating me, they can't seem to quit reading it. They keep hanging around. And so I think there is a real concern gnawing deep in their hearts that they may have gotten this thing wrong, and they want to be right so badly. And so I don't really know what to make of that, but I don't think anybody can look at this case, because it is such a circumstantial case, and have any real confidence that they have got the right person. And so those who know Curtis are convinced that he is not the murderer, which means that whoever did this crime is still out there, who was allowed to stay free in the world and was able to continue committing violent acts. Whoever did this had done violent acts before and was likely to continue to do that again. And so, I think we have to remember that the victims do know who did the killing, and it's, I don't want to be a little corny or get overly sentimental, but you can almost picture them looking down from heaven and saying, that's not the right guy. You got the right guy. So we're not honoring the victims by prosecuting and convicting an innocent person. We honor the victims by doing a thorough investigation, finding out beyond a reasonable doubt who did this, and then proceeding with justice. And we're not at that stage right now.
Yeah, I just think when I look at this case or so many other cases, not just this case alone, and I look at what Sister Michelle Milner said in her letter about Curtis Flowers about the state prison population being overwhelmingly black, 70% black, and most of these black folks are destitute, or they either be poorly educated, lack the access to certain financial, economic, where you will have your educational opportunities. It seems like all this stuff is about money. If Curtis, could get a private investigator, if Curtis could get a legal dream team, quote unquote, that he would not be in jail right now. But because Curtis is paying the penalty for being a victim of a society. It's like the white folks got in their mind, they look at so much law and order that the case will be solved within the end of the hour. And I look at the black people, it's like, we're used to dealing with this. Is a history of us having, people saying they'll be back, they're coming right back, and all of a sudden they're never seen again. Mm-hmm. Or they never heard from again. And we found a way to cope with that. It might be a very destructive to us in the long run, self-destructive-wise, but we found ways to cope with the fact that a lot of our people have been done wrong. Like the 3 civil rights workers, when they were looking for Swarner, Cheney, and Goodman, they come up finding all these black male bodies in swamps and stuff and rivers. Right. And where is the justice in that? Why is it that we could be looking at the same thing and see things so differently? Why is I want to say something. When you're talking about the history, you don't have to go back to those 3 civil rights workers. You can look at Winona history. There was a very prominent African-American, Jose Manyweather, and he was a jailer. He actually was drafted in 1972, drafted the Cincinnati Bengals. And he was jailer, and one of the white people that they took in was he was drunk, and he hit him first. And when he defended himself, the man fell, hit his head, and died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Well, they indicted him for manslaughter. Doug Evans was the prosecutor. Judge Loper was the judge. Wow. That you don't have to look very far to see that he was black, that man was white, and that automatically, and it's the same thing. If you're African-American and you're accused of the crime, you are guilty until you're proven innocent.
Yes, you're right.
In Winona, Mississippi. And that is very sad. And that's what happened to Curtis. They knew he didn't have the financial resources to get the representation, to get the investigators. Here's somebody, he's African-American, this is somebody we can make a villain, and this will be a quick slam dunk. That same summer, there were several other murders that happened in Winona, and they just wanted what they perceived to be this crime wave to stop. There is a black police chief there, but if you have a black police chief that doesn't have a strong African-American identity, that doesn't have that kind of at his heart, that seems to close his eyes to the fact of the way that African Americans are being treated, and even sometimes as a participant in that maltreatment, you don't get justice for people that are a minority. That's just a figurehead position.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is Alan Bean speaking. Now, I think you have to also remember that the civil rights movement never really came to Montgomery County, and I think one of the reasons that Fannie Lou Hamer and A.L.L Ponder were beaten so mercilessly in 1963, just days before Medgar Evers was shot, was because the leading lights, the sheriff, the deputies, and everybody who was in control of law enforcement in Montgomery County were just desperate to make sure that what was happening in Greenwood and throughout the Delta did not spread into the hill country and infect Montgomery County. And so there is no tradition of civil rights organizing in Montgomery County, and I think that really puts people like Curtis at a disadvantage. I think if this had happened in one of the more one of the parts of the Delta where there was a tradition of civil rights organizing, and in an area that had a larger African American population, if you could get 6 or 7 African Americans on the jury, I think they could probably convince the white folks to vote their way. But there's always a tendency for the group that is the majority on the jury to swing the other people. Now, if you can get 3 or 4 African Americans, you can probably hang the jury every time. If you can get 1, then you're going to get a guilty verdict. The only time there has been a decent number of African Americans on the jury in Curtis Flowers' trial was in Curtis Flowers' 4, the 4th trial. There were 5, and they all held out for acquittal, and I think that's very significant. So everything in this case, as Ray Carter mentioned in his email, hinges on jury selection. And I think there was an intentional move to frighten and to send a chill through the black community so that people would not want to be on the jury. I think that there's always been a tendency for a lot of jurors, black and white, to want to eliminate themselves from consideration by saying they couldn't vote for the death penalty, or they couldn't sit in judgment of another person, or that they had already made up their mind, they had a fixed opinion and couldn't change it. But I think when by the records that I was keeping, for every single white juror who made that kind of declaration, 5 African Americans were making a similar declaration. So by the time we got down to the last 45 jurors who were still in the veneer, 35 of them were white and only 10 were African American. And since both sides get 15 peremptory strikes, Doug Evans could have had an all-white jury had he wanted one. But I think for the sake of appearance, he left the lone African American on the jury. Evans is no fool. He had done his homework very carefully and had a very thorough report on every person who was in the veneer, particularly those in the African American community. He knew the people that he was looking for, that he definitely wanted to get rid of, and those he wanted to keep. So it was that was the battle. And one of the things, and I hate to change the subject in mid-comment, but one of the things that really struck me, particularly during the closing arguments, was that the fact issues, the state represented by Doug Evans, the district attorney, doesn't really have a good feel for the fact issues in this case. They're just a little litany of facts that he trots out. But there were a number of mistakes that were made in just stating basic facts of the case. And so I think somebody needs to go back in and just really dredge through every facet of the investigation and look at this case from scratch, as if the murders had just happened this morning. And I think that really needs to happen. The question is, how can we fund that? Because it's not going to happen on the cheap. Somebody's going to have to pay for it. And that's always been the problem.
I think my problem with Mississippi is that they're so eager to make so much money off their terrible history. That they want to build civil rights museums and all this other stuff, but they don't want to solve cold cases and whatnot, but they want to make money off these cold cases. They want to have celebrations and blues trails and civil rights trails, but nobody want to be accountable for the trails of tears that run in and out of Mississippi. And it sickens me because even like Reverend B, you was involved with the Gen 6 case. It's a type of way we could tap into like the law schools of America. The law student, some of the best law schools in America were willing to take on a Gen 6 case in a way. I think this would be an extraordinary case for them to take on. because this is not only about Curtis Flowers, this is about the prison industry complex. Like Sister Michelle Alexander says in her book, The Jim Crow. This is the new Jim Crow, the prison industry complex. And this is not just happening in Mississippi, but look at Oscar Grant out in L.A. You know, they had no black juror on the trial. And they gave the guy manslaughter, the police officer who killed Oscar Grant at the BART station in Oakland. They gave him manslaughter, but there were no African Americans on their jury. And so it's not just happening in Mississippi, it's happening all over the place. And I think that, you know, what the problem is that a lot of the young people are not informed. And so how can they act upon these things if not informed? Or we got this sense of justice where we think is this enough just to show up on one day to do a protest rally or do a march or do a speech. This got to be an ongoing process. We actually can develop institutions that could sustain these movements and turn them into solutions. So I'm saying, like, it's a lot of young folks, I believe, in the state of Mississippi don't know about these things because they don't know about the history of Mississippi in and of itself.
That's true.
And that's the problem. They don't know about the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Amsey Moores and people like that.
No.
Or about sister said, Michelle, you said about the brothers, the football players, Jose Merriweather. They don't know about these cases. They don't know about, when I think about this case, I'll think about a case, Robert Lee Goldsby, who got sentenced to the chair back in 1961. And they kept on having problems trying to get him to, the state had problems to try to get him to get executed. And that's one of the reasons why they lynched Mac Charles Parker back in 1959. Because they didn't want another Robert Lee Goldsby case. And, a lot of people don't know about these type of cases. And it blows my mind that this brother, when I speak to you all, and all y'all on the phone have spoken with Curtis Flowers, y'all have some type of relationship with Curtis Flowers, I get a sense of a person who has done a grave injustice. Like, it kind of remind me of the Michael Clark Duncan character in Green Mile, where everybody he come in contact with, they receive such a blessing from getting to know him. But still they sentence him to death anyway, although he's a great guy. And like you said in one of your blog posts, Reverend Mean, how one of the prison guards or whatever said he was like the finest young man ever put on a pair of pants. In his opinion, Curtis Flowers was a great guy. This is the prisoner guard. And so like that. Saying these things about Curtis, never had one disciplinary problem in his 13 years of confinement. And I keep on, it boggles my mind because I remember I was going to the website, Mr. Department of Corrections website, before the conclusion of the 6th trial. You could not find any information on Brother Curtis Flowers in the database. It like they kidnapped this guy and held him illegally for 13 years.
And that's what he's been done. He's been kidnapped and held illegally for 13 years. This is cruel and unusual punishment to make one individual go through 6 trials. That's not right.
It's crazy.
No, it was really clear to me. I always, I always sort of thought, well, Curtis is almost certainly innocent. It's just not plausible. But when I actually met him in person, we visited him in jail, and it just really, the last piece fell into place, but this didn't make any sense. When you meet the man face to face, I've heard reports of his character, when you meet him face to face, if anybody is just sort of incapable of killing 4 people in cold blood just by their nature, it's Curtis, Like, I would put my money on me doing that crime before him, Like, maybe I sleepwalked out to Mississippi and I did it. It's like, it was before he would do it. It just didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And then if he had killed those people, he wouldn't have been coming home every 2 weeks from Texas. He worked at Everson. He was off every other weekend. Every other weekend he came home. Now, if he had already gotten away, he wouldn't have been running back home every weekend.
Yeah.
And then
Curtis wasn't arrested until January of 1997, and so during that 7-month period, he came home regularly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things, like with the witnesses, like 2 of the witnesses, Patricia and Odell Holman, those are 2 of my distant cousins. And one of the things that they said, like she was out taking a walk. Patricia is pretty obese, unless she's lost some weight in the last few years. it's very doubtful that she was out taking a walk. The second thing is she wears glasses because she needs them. So it's very difficult for me to believe that she looked across the street and she was able to see his gym shoes because her vision has never been that good. She's not a reliable witness at all. Her brother, we called him Cookie, Odell, he's been in and out of jail for his entire life. I mean, he even admitted at one point that I'm telling a lie. And then after he went home, he decided, well, yeah, I was telling the truth the first time. I mean, how could you base those assumptions that he was guilty on those two individuals?
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, I don't want to be unkind or anything, but my father and I actually walked that route. We were taking a jog one morning, and we walked that route that she said she took on her walk. And we were walking up that hill she said she was climbing, and we were just huffing and puffing. And, me and my dad, we're in pretty good shape, and it's a steep hill. And I'm thinking of this woman who, how much would you say she weighs, Dad?
Well, probably 350 pounds.
Again, I don't mean to be unkind, but a man's life is on the line here, so let's just call it spade. She weighs like 350 pounds. The idea of her taking a morning walk, hiking up this hill is just unbelievable. And waking up at 4:30 in the morning to do so, and I'm thinking, and she doesn't even have a job. I mean, what kind of person who doesn't even have a job to wake up for wakes up at 4:30 in the morning to go on a hill, to hike up this hill, when that's got to be really hard on her, on her body. It just doesn't make any sense.
I did a little Google study this week of the route that they had Curtis Flowers walking to go and steal the gun, supposedly. And he could have, anybody who lived in that part of town, if they were going to go over to Angelica, would have taken the shortcut down the hill, through the cemetery, through the Walmart parking lot, then over to Angelica Street, down to the factory and back. That is 1/3 as long as the route they have him walking. And so if you were actually going to go and steal a gun, would you walk 3 times as far as you have to in a much more public route? Or would you surreptitiously steal up the hill through the cemetery? So, the very short route that he would have walked, that anybody who lived in that neighborhood would have walked, contrasted with this long, convoluted route that they have him walking, it just doesn't make any sense. And the only explanation is that they found some people who were willing to say they saw Curtis who were on that route, and so he had to have walked that long, convoluted route. And so, it's things like that that really create problems. Also, there are huge time gaps between the various testimonies. Somebody says they see Curtis walking towards Tardy's, about a block from Tardy's, at 9 o'clock, and then somebody else says, well, I saw Curtis running away from Tardy's at 5 after 10, 10 after 10, something like that. Mm-hmm. So they have him at the crime scene for a full hour. Well, what was he doing? Having a cup of coffee? It just doesn't make any sense. And so a lot of there's huge gaps, chronological gaps between the various witnesses, and there's absolutely no overlap between the physical descriptions they give of what Curtis was wearing and how he looked that day. One woman sees him coming down Campbell Street. He's wearing a pair of white shorts. Now, how you hide a gun in a pair of white shorts, I don't know, but 10 or 15 seconds later, another woman supposedly passes him coming up Campbell Street, and he's in his Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. He's got black slacks, he's got fancy shoes, he's got a nice dress, button-down white shirt, and he's got a gray jacket. Now, You're not going to be wearing a gray jacket when it's 95 degrees and humid in Mississippi.
Right.
But that's so she may have seen him at some time and then convinced herself that it was that day. But you see how shaky this kind of memory is. It just doesn't hold together at all. But there's so much of it. That's the problem. So they don't have quality, but they do have quantity.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, I feel sorry for the reader. We're throwing out all these random facts, and going to some detail, but I think that kind of makes the point that my father is making here, that the prosecution has so many bad facts that it takes like an entire, 3-volume set of rebuttal to explain why they're all a bunch of lies. I mean, it's just, they've assembled so many little, nonsense testimony, people lying, or people who are intimidated and testifying things they didn't see, or people who saying things that don't make any sense, or but when you put it together, it seems impressive, and it's just so complicated to take each one point by point and explain why each of them is not plausible or not true, that it's just overwhelming. It's an overwhelming task for the defense to do, and I think, the tendency is just to say, well, where there's smoke, there's fire, and vote to convict.
Yeah, but I'm here to talk to y'all. Y'all talking about the witnesses that testified about the area of Winona. These people are lifelong residents of Winona, I'm thinking, the people that's on the jury. And for them not to put these type of things together, to know that their hill is very steep, they know about the geography of Winona. It just seems to me they already had a lynch mob mentality when they came in, a deputized legal lynch mob, sitting there to do a search and found them guilty.
Yeah. The problem there, Ron, is that a lot of the white jurors wouldn't. Winona is a very segregated town.
Okay.
Historically, there are places where white people live and there are places where black people live. If you go into the communities and walk or jog, as I have done both on several occasions through that part of town, if you're near where Miss Lola Flowers lives, you will not see a white person. And so there probably has never been a white person on any of these juries who has any idea what the topography of that neighborhood looks like, what the hills look like, what the roads look like. So they can't make these connections on their own. And it's very difficult for defense counsel to get that across, or to even spend the time to get those facts into their own heads. I think the defense attorneys who have handled this case have all worked very, very hard, but they're all working professionals. They've got so much on their plates. They're underpaid, they're overworked, and they just do not have the time or the resources to undertake the kind of thorough investigation this case needs. Some attorneys have asked for money to pay for an investigator, and they have been refused. They have been told, well, you can get the facts from looking at the transcripts from the other trials. Well, the response was, well, in the other trials, my client was convicted, so that's not really going to be very helpful to me. So this is what we're up against. And of course, Curtis Flowers is just one case. It's a striking case, first of all, because it's a death penalty case, and also because he's the only guy who's ever been convicted 6 times on the same evidence in the same case. But these scenarios play out in case after case after case. I'm not saying that everybody who's in prison in Mississippi or Louisiana or Texas is innocent. Far from it. Most of these people are guilty of sin. The problem is that because we have made it so easy to convict, that it's very, very easy for innocent people to get caught up in the mechanics of wrongful prosecution. And also the fact that we have decided on this policy of mass incarceration, where we're just going to lock up everybody. Mississippi does not have, compared to other states, a disproportionate number of African Americans in prison. Mississippi has an inordinate number of citizens in prison. It is the leading incarcerating state in the nation. It sort of vies with Louisiana for that record, and right behind is the state of Texas. And so in those 3 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, you have a rate of incarceration that is 2 or 3 times the rest of the country. And when you understand that America incarcerates at 5 or 6 times the rate of most other countries, we're living in a part of the world that incarcerates 10 to 20 times as many people as most Western democracies. Something has gone badly wrong, and I think that's what Michelle Alexander is trying to get at, that this isn't just about the criminal justice system, what happens in the courtroom. It's about the whole mentality of the nation and this desire to solve problems by locking people up. And in the process of opting for mass incarceration, we have made it easier and easier and easier to convict people. And the trial of Curtis Flowers shows what happens at the end of the road.
Yeah, I know you bring up Michelle Alexander, and I know guy, Douglas Blackmore, a white guy who works for Wall Street Journal. He wrote the book Slavery Without a Name. What happened when you privatize prison? a lot of the prison privatization movement. I mean, we all live in a prison state. Literally, anybody could be a prisoner one day. It's like what Emperor Haile Selassie said when he addressed the League of Nations when Italy invaded Ethiopia. He said, "Today us, tomorrow you." It actually could be you in prison. I think people need to get a scared straight tactic because they got to understand this could be you or your loved one sitting in prison like Curtis Flowers on death row. This could be.
I think part of the challenge. I think part of the challenge for white people is it couldn't be them. I mean, I have had some family members, who've had trouble with the law, but it's just, I mean, as far as the impact, it's really amazing. Even at a place like Harvard, when you're talking to black people and white people, a completely different experience. I mean, just talk to Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates. He's a Harvard professor, and even he has this negative encounter with a police officer. I mean, and he gets arrested. I mean, it's just there's such a divide, and I think, part of the problem is it's mass incarceration, but it's focused on poor black people, particularly men, and I think you saw that in the Curtis Flowers case that one of the things that was striking to me and overhearing the white people talking and people talking to us, people trying to argue that we were on the wrong side of things and try to get us to change our minds. The way they talked about Curtis was very informative. I mean, in their minds, he was this dangerous thug, who had baggy jeans and was like toting guns and, was slapping hoes. I mean, this whole stereotype they had constructed. And which did, it was ridiculous because first of all, he's from a small town and, that's not, second of all, that's just not his style. Like he's a church man, he's like, he's respectful to women. He's not, he's law abiding. He doesn't like guns. It's like all these things. He's not a thug. If anyone, I'm more of a thug than Curtis Flowers is, really. I mean, if you'd put me in prison for 13 years, I don't know if I would be able to go without a disciplinary record, because there's always people challenging you. I mean, if you can stay out of trouble in prison, if you are not a thug constitutionally. But they were describing him that way. And where did they get that? I mean, that was just made up. That was just from their head. They're watching too much TV, and to them it's just so plausible that that's where he belongs. He just belongs in prison. He belongs on death row. And I think that's where race comes in, and it gets really satanic. That kind of hatred. Where does that come from? It's really dangerous.
Well, like Sister Lola Flowers. I mean, I'm just you talk about Roxanne Ballard. I ain't trying to slander, do anything, talk about her character, but like she didn't know the guy. I mean, she didn't know. She said this is the guy, and it was a black man that got killed that day too. And he got shot twice in the head.
Yeah.
And he's like, everybody else got shot once. This guy got shot twice in the head. So it's weird that she could say, well, it's weird. It's really weird. We're not comfortable in having like honest dialogue in this quote unquote post-racial America. We are not comfortable in talking about these type of things, these quote unquote taboos, and it got to be addressed because something's wrong. Because, like for example, the Willie McGee case, the black man who was on death row, he allegedly raped this white woman who was a housewife back in the 45. I'm gonna have his granddaughter on next week, along with Liz Asberg. Her mom, Bella Asberg, the congresswoman from New York, was his lawyer. This is back in the 40s and whatnot. And, you talk to some of the black folks from back then, or the white folks from back then. The black folks said it was a consensual relationship between Willie McGee and the white woman. And then you talk to the white folks, they say, well, no, that can't happen. That's not realistic. But then you look at the different shades of black folks and look at Mississippi, you look at around the country. I mean, look at Barack Obama.
All right.
People say it's white. His daddy was black. But I'm saying, like, it's just weird how we got these, like, two Americas. Like, we can look at the same thing but see something totally different. And, I mean, even up to this day, like, even with you look at the fact that how Curtis is being portrayed, and I'm talking to you all on the phone, y'all know Curtis, but then the fact how he's being portrayed, and that's why it's so important to help control your media. And if you don't control your media, like Malcolm said, he said it can make your friends your enemy and your enemy your friend. That's the power of the perception of media. And if you got the media folks that are not doing their jobs and not reporting the facts and whatever, I actually reached out to Amanda Sexton of the publisher of the Winona Times. Because I read the Winona Times too. and read Reverend Alamein stuff. I think, Reverend Alamein offers a great, inside look, a personal look at what's going on well with the facts. And I thought Amanda Sexton, to her ability, was able to be objective as much as possible. So I invite her on to talk about the case as well. But to me, you just look at all these trials, look at the fact that James Bibb, here's a guy who was a retired school teacher, so he had nothing to lose, so he could say the truth, and he almost got put in jail for it. But he was retired, he's well-respected, Vietnam veteran, I believe, and all this stuff. But he said, you know what, this ain't right. And that's why it's so important to have a jury of your peers that know the topography of the black community, that knows the experience of black Americans in this country, to be on your jury, because that's the jury of your peers. And to me, as small of a town as Winona is, for white folks not to go to certain parts of town because where black folks stay at, it's kind of weird to me. It ain't like it's a big city or anything like that.
True.
But but you talk to the white folks while I read the stuff, like the white folks say, black and white get along. It's like the outside agitators like Dr. Bean and Reverend Bean. These outside agitators always exist. Outside agitators is rebel-rousing and stirring up trouble. But like Reverend Alamein said, trouble been stirred up a long time ago, and they just removed me. So, my thing is, what solution? I want to leave with some solutions. What can we do from here? We all know that money is needed to help out with defense and also for investigation. And what are some other things that we all can commit to doing, ensuring that Curtis Flowers get out of jail?
Well, I think one thing that people can do is to go to the Friends of Justice website and to comment, just to join the conversation, because you'll be able to interact with some folks from the white community in Winona there. I think we need to get some African Americans from Winona in on that conversation, because right now it's basically just these folks mouthing off. Now, I don't. That's probably not the most productive thing that we could do. I think we need to be donating money, particularly to the investigation, and you can do that through the Friends of Justice website. We need to have other avenues as well. I think we need to raise the profile of this case to the point where we can get pro bono attorneys. I think it's going to take several people working together, probably a team of 5 or 6 at the very least, supplemented with at least 1 or 2 investigators working on this case full-time for a period of months before we will be in a position to take the fight into the courtroom again. I think a lot depends right now on what the Mississippi Supreme Court is going to do. There's been a motion for a new trial that was filed, and as well as the appeal. And so there are 2 opportunities to turn the case back, remand it back for trial. But that's probably the best case scenario that we're looking at. And then, of course, there's also the possibility of making an appeal to the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice. That probably won't happen until all the state remedies have been exhausted. So it's, there are a lot of things that can be done in the future. But right now, I think people need to express their concern about this case. And it's difficult, I think, in the state of Mississippi for most people to get a feel for this case because it rarely ends up in the papers. Even the Jackson paper covered the trial very superficially, I thought. And they only had people there at the beginning and at the end. They didn't have anybody in the courtroom for the duration, and they didn't really have any perspective on who these eyewitnesses were. They had no way of evaluating the credibility of their testimony. They just reported, jailmate of Curtis Flowers says that Curtis confessed to killing the 4 people at Tardy Furniture. Well, anybody who knows A.L.L, and I appreciate Ms. Milner giving that personal aside, realizes that A.L. had absolutely no credibility, and yet he was treated as a credible witness. And so I think there are a lot of people who potentially could be allies with us in this fight who have heard so little about the case and have really been given no reason to believe there's anything wrong with this prosecution. And so we need to do a better job of public education as well.
Yeah, man, why the incident is such like the incident is the real fourth estate in terms of disseminating information, because what you did with the blog was outstanding. You should be awarded a Pulitzer for the coverage of the Curtis Flowers trial. Because I really was engrossed in the reading of the stuff you put out there, and also some of the things that went on. You know, the people that commented, that witnessed for themselves the miscarriage of justice, or just us going down in Winona, Mississippi. And I would think that you know, that's the problem with the papers though. It's like people want to deal with the past. We could talk about Emmett Till now. We could talk about, you know, Medgar Evers and Swearingen, Shaman, and Goodman, but don't talk about Curtis Flowers. Don't talk about the Scott sisters. Don't talk about the Leah Outlaw. Don't talk about the people that are suffering from this legacy of injustice and going on right now. The fruits, the strange fruit that's emanating from this tree of injustice and miseducation. So I think that's very important that the dialogue continue, because I think a lot of times people say, well, people talk too much. I think people don't talk enough about the right thing. I don't think people talk too much. Who's not talking about the right things at the right point in time, because you look at the case, if there's no fingerprints, they can't find the gun. They haven't found the murder weapon. He said a Grant Hill. I mean, you know how many people with tin and hell, shoe shines? I mean, people wearing Grant Hills like people wear Jordans today. Everybody's wearing Grant Hills. You know what I'm saying? So that don't do me any good. I'm looking at that type of stuff. Convince me, show me. And also, going back to, I mean, it's like a professional hit. Was there any inside problem with the family? Now I'll go back to, a lot of times when the wife get killed, one of the first suspects is the husband. You look at the people closest. You know, like Shakespeare, the people that are closest to the crime benefit the most.
And that day the people got killed, the husband, he didn't go to work, and that's the first time he missed work in 50 years.
Oh, really? The husband?
Tardy,
Oh,
wow. Is he deceased now?
So they say he is.
See, have you got a case of having people say they dead, they not dead? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't want to come up with any dark conspiracy theories here, but the problem is that possibility that there was, you know, strife within the family for some reason, that was never looked at. That was never examined as a possibility, because it would have sounded crude. It would have sounded like you were blaming the victims. There would have been backlash, and that didn't feel good. So it was so much more comfortable to go with this low-status African-American guy. And I think that's what happened. And I don't know what would have happened if those options had been examined. I don't know if there's anything there or not. I'm not privy to that information. But it should have been part of the investigation, and it wasn't.
It's part of any routine investigation. Mm-hmm. You always look at the families and the loved ones first. I mean, that's just routine investigation. You just have to eliminate them as suspects. There's always that possibility.
Like Cain and Abel. I mean, it's like in biblical times. That's right. Go back a while. So, but you know what? It shows you that, you know, people always think about conspiracies. It's not that people, I mean, like, for example, when a head of state, like a president, or like somebody like Dr. King, somebody like that gets killed, and all of a sudden you see the folks scrubbing up the crime scene. That's not protocol. You know, you do, like, JFK supposed to get his autopsy done in Dallas. You know, it ain't supposed to be done in Maryland. You know, and you start looking at things, and a lot of times people might be incompetent because they ain't doing their job. Because a lot of times I look at people that's being very incompetent in what they're doing. Like I said, I look at the people that investigate these cases as Barney Fife and Keystone Cops. I don't look at them as really being like Sherlock Holmes or House, you know, anybody like that with a discerning ability or with a certain type of intellect. You know, a lot of times you just get the people that just doing a job. They don't look at it as a passion or a calling. Like Reverend Bean, you look at what you're doing as a calling. So you got a passion. You're a seeker of the truth. A lot of these folks just trying to pay bills. You know, the economic situation, I'm trying to pay bills. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to pay the mortgage. I'm not really worried about if this Negro did it or not. Somebody just got to go to jail. So it becomes very politically charged. And I think a lot of times, like you look at politics, like you look at congressional hearings, we don't want to point the finger at anybody. What the hell are we doing here for then? Why are we having a hearing?
Exactly.
Yeah. We don't want to point the finger.
I'd like to pick up a little bit about what you said, Ron, about not wanting. We're fine going back to 1964. We're fine going back to Emmett Till, Medgar Evers in '63. Some of that stuff, but we don't want to deal with the more recent things. When you realize Curtis was arrested or the murders happened in 1996. That wasn't very far after there was a major sea change in politics in the state of Mississippi. People tend to say, it's sort of a binary thing. Have we transcended Jim Crow or have we not? And there's a yes or no answer to that question. Well, obviously, things aren't as bad as they were in 1962, but does that mean we've gone all the distance we need to go? It's a process. It's not an on or off switch. I went to the Mississippi legislature one day and just sort of walked through the hall and took some pictures of the state representatives and also the senators. And for decades after Jim Crow ended, there was only one African American in the House of Representatives, none in the Senate, and then there were two. And it wasn't until 1990, 1991, in that era, that there was a major sea change, and 42 African American legislators were voted in. And one of the reasons for that was redistricting. A lot of the gerrymandering was undone. But also there was a massive get the vote out, especially in the black community, especially in the Delta. And it was during that period that Doug Evans became politically active and decided to run for district attorney. Who did he go to make his speeches? The Council of Conservative Citizens, this successor organization to the old White Citizens Council. And, while the challenge that the Council of Conservative Citizens was facing at that time was this resurgence of African American interest in politics and this demand that we be represented fairly in the legislature. They were opposed to that. They were standing against that, and Doug Evans is right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying Doug Evans is a racist. I'm saying Doug Evans is a representative, normal Mississippian living in Grenada, Mississippi. And he grew up in the middle of all of the turmoil. By the time the schools were segregated in Grenada, he had already graduated from high school. He was a fully formed individual. His mind was shaped by Jim Crow segregation. And I don't think anybody who grew up in that era, unless they've had a dramatic come-to-Jesus, Damascus Road experience, has been able to leave behind the kind of prejudice and bias that naturally was part of that world. And so, I think if you are a district attorney, you really have to be examining your soul. If you grew up during that time, and say, am I being fair? Am I being equal? And I don't think Doug Evans has even thought of asking those questions.
It's like, to me, he's like one of them guys. I'm not going to say that he's like Mel Gibson or whatever. He got a church in his backyard. But it's like he's like one of them guys. You just know that when he's right, he's right. He may be kind of, he's right. I'm right. I represent God on earth. I am infallible. I don't make mistakes.
That's right.
The truth is not on his side, though. The truth is not on his side. No. I just keep on thinking about, okay, Mississippi, because of that sea change you talk about, Reverend Mean, Mississippi got more elected black officials than any state in the union, but yet I'm looking at what's going on with Curtis Flowers and Scott Sisters and so many other cases and the prison industry complex in general. It don't really make a difference to him, like the sister Michelle said about the sheriff. I mean, that's the heritage, the identity.
The police, yeah.
He's a gatekeeper, right? He's a gatekeeper for a lot of wrongdoing.
That's it.
Yeah.
And hold up state secrets. That's all you are.
Yeah, I think if you ask Johnny Hargrove, the chief of police, the African-American chief of police in Winona, if he really believes in his heart that Curtis is guilty, if he was going to give you an honest answer, he would say no. But I don't think he would give you an honest answer because I don't think his position would be viable. If he did, I mean, he's got to go along to get along, and that shows you what we are, that a lot of things have changed for the better, but a lot of things need to change.
Yeah, and I thought you were being overly gracious there, saying that we don't know if Doug Evans is a racist. Now, I think sometimes people hate using that R word to label people and all, but when you give speeches to the Council of Conservative Citizens, if you're willing to be associated with that kind of people, I mean, you can say, well, is he a racist if he isn't? Well, I'm just going to say again, he gives speeches to the Council of Conservative Citizens, and they're an anti-black hate group. I mean, if you go to their website, their platform is basically preventing race mixing and defending white supremacy. Now, if you don't have to call it racist if you want, but if you don't, then the word kind of breaks down and loses all meaning. Just for the record.
But also, I mean, the state rep of the area of Winona. I mean, I reached out to everybody to try to get them come up to state rep Lydia Chastano, I believe her name, Chastano.
Yeah.
I reached out to her.
Unfortunate first name, man. Goodness about that.
All right, it's cool with you. It's good Lydia, bad witch, good Lydia, bad Lydia. You know, like with. But you know, like somebody like Abu Jamal said about Robert Byrd, Senator Robert Byrd, who was a Klansman. He said, you know, people are not calling him a racist, but he was a Klansman at heart. And all the said, all the good things he did by West Virginia, he still was a Klansman. I mean, it's like he was a historian himself. Look at his history, his historical voting record. Look at how he tried to deny Thurgood Marshall access to the Supreme Court. And Thurgood Marshall won 29 cases out of 32 before the Supreme Court. He's probably the most successful lawyer of his generation, black or white. Yeah. And he tried to deny him access as Solicitor General and all this other stuff. That's insane. You know, you look at some of the speeches he's done in the past. You can't hide from that. It's on YouTube. So without that, but at the same time, I think what the problem is, kind of like what the guy, one of the Hell brothers who killed Emmett Till said back in '85 for the anniversary of Emmett Till. He was still operating in Mississippi, had a little fruit stand with watermelons and whatnot. He said, you know, the black people today are not as afraid as they were back then, but if they don't know. If they knew who I was, I'll be a dead man. They buy from me. And just, people forget that the people who got Emmett Till in trouble were black folks. They told the brother, the husband of the wife, that, oh, this black dude from Chicago came in your store. It was the black folks that got him in trouble. You look at the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. He had a lot of black spies. It was black folks that helped get Medgar Evers killed. It was black folks that told the citizen council the license plate of Swerner, Michael Swerner's license plate. You know, he had a lot of black informants. So everybody, just because you got my skin, you ain't my kin type of thing. And that's why it's important to know this, that a lot of times, you know, bad things happen when good people do nothing. You know, and, you know, Dr. King talked about dying a spiritual death. You know, he said, I'd rather die at 36 than be spiritual dead at 80. So, I mean, there's a lot of choices we maybe got to live with them.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the dynamics of racism, the color of your skin is irrelevant. I mean, the fact of the matter, a lot of people have said I'm a racist because I am saying that the 9 people who are supposedly eyewitnesses in this case are lying, and they're black, and I'm white, so that makes me a racist. Well, no, it doesn't. You know, the fact of the matter is we're trying to get at the truth here, and it's the willingness to admit the truth and to wrestle with the facts that is an indicator of bias. And I think you just have to look at it and say, yes, racism affects black people as much as it affects white people. White people may have the problem with the hatred, with the bigotry, with the prejudice, the stereotyping, etc. But black people have the problem with the sense of self-worth, that they sell themselves out, they sell each other out. You know, they're afraid. They don't know their own history. So there are problems that the history of Jim Crow and segregation and racism has created for black people and for white people. It's a sickness that infects both sides of the color line. And I think we can see it in the immigration crisis today, that it's not just black and white, it's also Hispanic. And so we have to look at this and say it's not just a matter of, you know, who's saying it. Is it a black person or a white person who's saying it? The question is, what is being said, and is it true? And so I think in this case we have to look at it and say, you know, it's not that everybody who's black in Winona is a good person and everybody who's white is a bad person. That isn't the point. You know, the question is, how much has the evil of Jim Crow segregation in the past controlled the present? You know, how much control persists into this present day? What are the vestigial remains of that old regime? Have we washed it all away, or is it still there with us in a very powerful way? And I think that's why Michelle Alexander's argument has resonated so strongly, because she's saying this is the new Jim Crow. You know, meet the new Jim Crow just like the old Jim Crow. It's the trappings are different, the social dynamics are different, but often the results are just as devastating.
Uh-huh.
I never agree with that. I think my thing is this, though. I keep on looking at how we need to be more revolutionary mindset than reactionary. So everybody's talking about what happened up in Detroit. Hannah Jones, sister got shot, doing a reality TV show, all things, for a cop show, the First 48, whatever. You look at what's going on in Oakland, Oscar Grant getting killed. People saw it around the world on YouTube what happened to Oscar Grant in that situation. And I think so many things happen and people get discouraged from fighting. And like Tip O'Neill said so many years ago, he said all politics are local. And if you get stuff done on a local level, you would get immediate results. And people will say, you know what, if they could do it on that local level, then it can become a national phenomenon. Because we got the tools and resources to connect all these things. I think the problem is I see so many cases, like people give me emails about the Curtis Flowers and the Scott sisters and the A.L.L. There's so many other cases throughout the country that needs attention, kind of like what Troy Davis is getting right now at the moment. But it didn't happen overnight. I mean, Troy Davis has been in jail for almost 20 years. I mean, on death row, whatever.
Right.
And it takes time. Like you said, Reverend Bean told me in Mississippi, it's going to take some time to put these things together, but it can happen. And I think a lot of times these battles that are hard to win are the ones we need to be fighting, because it's all about, legacy building and making sure that these stories and these people don't get lost between all the crap and BS that we see. Because, like, when I listen to people a lot of times, when they interview people on news, it's like all they doing is kind of like we're like zombies. We're consuming crap and we're just regurgitating what we've been told. Like 1984. Right. You know what I'm saying? Everybody repeating the talking points. We don't even know that we're learning talking points. But everybody's repeating talking points because nobody wants to take the time to seek the truth for themselves. And to me, I look at you. You come from the tradition of John Brown and Elijah Lovejoy. You one of the white folks I like.
Thank you.
You and your daughter. I'm saying you wasn't the good white folks. You know what I'm saying? People gotta realize that. I hear so many folks that walk around. Some brothers and sisters I know, they look at everything about the color. I look at the people. Color comes with your actions. To me, the way you feel speaks a lot. You don't have to tell me you're a Christian. I can look at your actions and the way you carry yourself.
Right, because when you meet them, you don't see a color. You don't even see them as white. You just see them as people.
You're looking for the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got to figure out how to connect all these seekers throughout the world, because everybody's seeking something, and everybody's not satisfied with the status quo. Everybody's looking for something different. But people been told all their lives they can't affect change. One person can make a difference. I mean, Sister Lola, you're making a difference by keeping the faith and being there for your son and not letting them bring you down. Reverend Bean, Dr. Lydia, Sister Michelle, y'all make a difference by speaking out and being vigilant and making sure that, justice is going to be served eventually. But we got to keep on repeating these stories, and so we got to keep on, like people say, well, why do you always talk about things over and over again? You learn through repetition. We got to keep on repeating these things. Like you might have to wear I am a Curtis Flowers shirt. I learned marketing is so important in these type of things. And marketing is so important in business. These things must be marketed. I am Troy Davis. Like when Amnesty International did I am Troy Davis shirt. I still wear that shirt. I worked with Amnesty International for a couple months. And I wear that shirt and I go walking and stuff. He said, who is Troy Davis? That's a learning moment. It's time for me to educate you on who Troy Davis is. They can tell somebody else. And they can tell somebody else.
Well, I got on a plane and flew to Atlanta when they had an Amnesty International rally on the steps of the Georgia legislature. I don't know why I did that. I just wanted to stand in solidarity for people, because the case, the Troy Davis case is so much like the Curtis Flowers case in so many ways. But, when Lola was saying when you meet me and Lydia and people who are with us, you don't see color. Well, when Lydia and I met with Curtis, and when I met with Curtis with his family a month or two earlier, you don't see Curtis Flowers as being a convict or being an inmate or being a murder suspect. He just comes walking up, and he's just a guy. He's a really nice guy. He's a family man. He's there. He loves his family. He loves the Lord. He loves to sing. And he is convinced that God is putting him through this for a reason, and that he's going to find out what that reason is someday. He doesn't know what it is now, but he's living by faith. He doesn't strike you as a thug or as a hardened, embittered man. He doesn't have a dark and brooding soul like a lot of people who have been subjected to injustice. And so, you want to keep fighting for a guy like that.
This is Lola Flowers. Got anything else to add to that?
No, like you said, when Curtis and I talk, and we just believe. Like I said, God opened the Red Sea and let Moses carry those people through. He gonna open this jail bars and let Curtis out. We don't know when, but he's coming out.
I heard that. Dr. Bean?
Amen to that.
Okay. Michelle? Sister Michelle?
Uh-huh.
You got anything you want to say? Your thoughts on your mind?
I just want to thank Dr. Bean for being able to put my thoughts out there on the blog. I didn't really, I wasn't really expecting that. I was just kind of trying to see what else, I could do, because they were depicting Curtis as being this, dark, brooding monster that killed these people and has just gone on. And I didn't want people to think that that's the kind of person that he was. I wanted to be one that could say, this is not the kind of person that you think he is.
Yeah, and the reason I published your post, your wonderful post on the blog, Michelle, is that I can't say that because I didn't grow up with Curtis. And so, and everybody expects that Ms. Lola is going to say it, and Mr. Archie and all the other people in the family. But when somebody, who isn't part of the immediate family, but who did know Curtis back in the day, can step forward and say that, especially somebody as educated and articulate as you are, that really has a powerful impact. And the post that you wrote has had a lot of activity. A lot of people have been reading it, hundreds and hundreds, and it's I think it's having a real impact.
Right.
Yeah, I got you on the show tonight because I read it on the Friend of Justice website, and Reverend Ming gave me your email, so I looked up on Facebook too. So the stuff happens. For every action, there's a reaction. So if you do something, something's going to happen. So
well, I'm glad I really wanted to, because he's such, a great person, and this is such a devastating thing that has happened to him. But when you see him and the way he carries himself, and when you hear his witness, like they were just saying, I believe that God's going to take me through this, for a purpose and for a reason. You really can't help but be drawn to somebody like that to try to, to jump in and to help. And I think for the African American people, I think Maxine Waters said this. She said this about the Civil Rights Bill. I think the thing that happened is that we won. And I think African American people have just become kind of comfortable with where we are and what we have and the things that we have. And as long as we're kind of able to make it, we just want to close our eyes to some things that are unpleasant, because that's very painful to say. I'm still almost in the same place with this lack of power that I was 40 years ago. For all intents and purposes, I can still be incarcerated on almost nothing, just like I could have 40 years ago. And I think that's very difficult for them to say, but I think until they say it in that area, they're never going to get the power back.
That's true. That's true. Somebody told me once, Langston Hughes once said this, I'm going to paraphrase Langston Hughes, that every generation must redefine freedom for themselves and fight for it. Every generation got to redefine it for themselves what freedom means. And Dr. King said, man, they wouldn't. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Reverend Bean was right that the civil rights movement probably never made it to Winona. I grew up in Carroll County, and probably one of my heroes was David Jordan. He's a senator from Greenwood, Mississippi, and he was always fight the power. I mean, he never left where he lived, and he, sued the city of Greenwood several times. They tried to pass a law so that he couldn't serve in the city and in the state at the same time. So I kind of grew up around him. My father would take us trips around to the barbershops and the places that they were. So I think I have that kind of revolutionary spirit. That's why I was saying, you know, I've read these things, I've heard these things, but I'm not really being a participant in something that's happening to somebody I consider to be a friend of mine, and I should be on the front lines with him. If I'm not helping him fight, I'm helping the people that are hurting him. And I cannot keep looking myself in the mirror every day knowing that he's going through that and I'm not in some way trying to help.
Yeah, I mean, blood will be on all our hands if we don't try to do something. Because, like they said, bad things happen when good people don't do a thing. And, I mean, it's very important that people be active. And even if it's all it is just writing something and sending it to your local paper or just talking about the Curtis Flowers case at your church, anything is better than nothing. Anything is better than nothing. And, and I think that in a lot of ways, when I listen to what's going on in the Gulf Coast with the oil spill, and even Katrina, like getting to Katrina, like the fact that these officers that killed these black men and violated their civil rights will be they got the probability of facing the death penalty. So you look at Katrina, a lot of people didn't believe the stuff that was going on, but the media said that people was eating people on the first day. The people were eating people up, calling people that live there all their lives refugees, saying that, the white folks, they were trying to survive and the black folks were looting and all this other stuff. And you hear these stories that are coming out of Katrina about people being denied the chance to cross the bridge to get to dry land. Or you hear like certain white folks acting like lynch mobs, going around just shooting random black people. And this stuff still, with the dancing bridge thing that happened, the fact that it was the grassroots folks that made sure the people did their job, the Department of Justice did their jobs. It was the people on the Internet blogging about the stories of injustice they heard during the Katrina fiasco or Hurricane FEMA, whatever you want to call it, that kept these stories alive. Because so many people lost their lives not because of the hurricane, but because of negligence. The government for many decades. They knew that the levees weren't good enough, but yet, for whatever reason, they kept the levees as they were, for decades and decades. So that's a failure that is really a legacy of failure that we stand upon. And you look at what's going on with Curtis Flowers, it's a legacy of failure that we stand upon when we don't hold our justice officials or our system accountable and make sure that they treat everybody equally under law. In spite of your guilt or innocence, everybody should have a fair trial by a jury of their peers. It should just be the way it should be. And, it's terrible because you look at the fact that, I know, Sister Michelle, you getting your doctorate. And, you got Dr. Lydia B., you work with young people at Baylor and Reverend Mean. You oversee a flock of folks that follow you. And a lot of our young people, a lot of them can't read and write coming out of school. They're getting diplomas. A lot of them ain't dropping out of school. They're not dropping into school either, but they're getting diplomas. A lot of them can't read and write at their grade levels. And some of our kids, they have little kids already. They got, I meet girls that's 14 and 15 got 2 or 3 kids. And they can't even read or write or fill out a job application. So it's really getting kind of pessimistic out here. We got a lot of young people. They got ability. They want to be a part of something. They see something's wrong, but you can't articulate it because you don't got the education behind you.
That's something where.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's something I'm working on a local campaign in Waco, and that's one thing. The local public schools are, for a long time people had given up on them, and they just move out to the suburbs. They send their kids to private schools. They just say it's not worth the trouble, and that's been changing. A couple of years ago they got a bond passed to do some repairs. The school buildings were falling down. They were just that neglected. But there are things you can do to turn that around. Part of it is just a failure of will. Like basically people give up on certain neighborhoods, whole neighborhoods with the kids, and they just figure there's still nothing good going to happen from those kids. I've been sending my students, I give credit if they'll go tutor, I think 3rd graders, because if they say if you don't learn to read well by the 4th grade, you probably never will. You're going to be behind for the rest of your life as far as basic literacy. But they have a program where they send out volunteers to read with these kids, to practice reading with them 3 days a week. They can make these dramatic gains. It's like changing their citizenship for the rest of their lives because they have that basic tool they need to succeed and to give back to their community. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that can be done.
That's true, but like you said, it's all about the will. And like I said, with the Curtis Flowers case, we got these type of people. We talk about this conversation. If Curtis got people like us on his side, he can't fail. We can't fail.
That's right.
Justice will be done because it is all about the will. Because everything else falls in place once you have the desire to do something. And so I'd like to thank everybody once again for being here in this conversation. We'll have many more. And I'd like to get some very positive updates coming very soon about this case and so many other cases. And we got to find a way to hook up everybody, not just, Curtis Flowers, but, get in with the Troy Davis people, get in with the Scott Sisters people, get in with the Oscar Grant people. We need a movement, just like they did for Nelson Mandela, the college students in the 70s and the 80s and whatnot, and trying to divest money out of South Africa. We need a movement among the young people as well as with the civil rights movement. We need the intergenerational movement partners. You need to have A.L.L. Randolph working with Dr. Martin Luther King. You need to have the gay transgender community like Bayer Rustin, who organized the March in Washington, working with Dr. King, the Black Church, and A.L.L. Randolph, and working with the NACP and working with the rabbis and the Catholic priests and stuff like that. I think everything is ripe for that time to come. I mean, everything is ripe right now. People looking for something different. And I think people looking for something for substance now, since we are in the situation we are in. And we're all in this together. So I thank everybody once again for being on the show. And Reverend Ben, where can we find more information about Curtis Flowers case? Once again, how to support Curtis Flowers?
Oh, you can, this is Dr. Bean, but you can go to the website, www.friendsofjustice.net, and you can look at our blog. And we encourage you to sign up for the mailing list as well, because when there's action updates, when there's something concrete, we need you to call people or write letters. You'll be able to get that through the mailing list.
Okay, that's great. And also, I'd like to thank Sister Lola Flowers for being on the phone program. And Sister Lola Flowers, you just keep on keeping the faith.
All right. And
you're a beautiful sister. I thank you. I mean, you're a precious person. And Sister Michelle Milner, you're a good people. I love talking to you too. I mean, you got a great head on your shoulders, and you got a heart made out of gold as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Lydia Bean, a fine, fine individual indeed. They said fruit don't fall too far from the tree, and you can come from a tree of freedom. So thank you. It's a joy to have you on. And also, Reverend Bean, what can I say about you? You're a force of nature, sir. Keep on doing.
Thank you very much. It's been great being with you tonight.
It's great. We'll have more conversations and more events to do. Just the beginning. Thank you all.
All right.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.